Hello, what's hip hop happening, party people? So I hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to INTR 101. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about project management. So we're kind of winding down the semester, fall break's about to happen, and then afterwards it's sort of a mad dash to the finish. So you might be feeling that sort of onset of worry about studying for final exams or final projects. So we're going to talk about what goes into that today. So basically, the big theme of today's lecture is project management. So what is project management? What does it include? Well, in general, it includes the planning, execution, completion, and evaluation of a large project. These projects are usually more involved if they require this level of detail than, say, just your general essay or homework assignment. And your timeline tends to be longer than a week. So I know some of my students that are in the art and architecture program will have projects that they know about from the start of the semester that they're consistently working on throughout the course. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that often for large projects, other people or resources are often involved as well. So the question you may be asking is, okay, Kelly, what's the difference between action planning and project management? And the answer is, not a lot, I guess. It's more about scale. So you might make one action plan for a normal assignment, and project management is going to include a lot of smaller plans that all lead up and make up a much bigger plan for a larger project. So the first thing you want to do when it comes to project management is get the big picture. So ask yourself, okay, what's the point of the project? What's the plan of it? And then create an outline action plan. And what I mean by that is you want to consider what are the major tasks that you need to complete in order to get this done. So let's say you're in CNR and you're working on, a senior thesis research plan, right? And you have a whole year to do it. The benchmarks that you might have are you need to compile a lit review, you need to actually write, maybe it's like a 15-page paper or something. You need to develop a poster, and then you need to present. So maybe those are your like 4 big things. Within that, you want to give yourself some rough deadlines to work towards. So when we talked about action planning, we had a lot of smaller deadlines. You're going to do the same thing here, but you're going to set your sort of like benchmark things. So, maybe it's, okay, I've got the lit review done. Now I'm going to work on the essay, and you're going to set deadlines for those really large parts of it. And the point of this is to give yourself an overview of how you'll complete the project. So this gives you really broad scaffolding. You can kind of think of it as like the structure or the frame of the house, right? You're going to build around this first plan. Then you're going to take it down a notch. So you're going to create more involved action plans for the time between big due dates. And maybe the due dates that you set for yourself for those big things are a bit more firm, and all of the other ones, that action plan in between, is a bit more flexible. So you want to make a plan for each component of the project. And you can action plan at any scale that works for you, just like normal. So let's say you're action planning the lit review and you need to take it down a further notch. And you're like, okay, I'm going to do this half of it first and this half of it second. So just making sure you have whatever scale makes sense and is most useful for yourself. The other thing you want to make sure to include are any resources that you might need. So let's say you're doing a large project for art and architecture. You may need access to a certain studio, you may need certain software, and that software or studio space may require you to reach out to different faculty members to get use or help with them. So making sure to include those sorts of reminders for yourself throughout the project. Additionally, you may want to schedule some times to check in with the professor or the person who's leading this larger project to make sure that you're staying on track and they can see the work that you're doing. You want to give yourself enough structure to be successful, but also remember to be flexible. So if you're in engineering, one of the big projects that you have is your senior project for engineering, right? This is usually a year to a semester long project where you're working with industry partners or faculty partners There's all sorts of budgetary things that go into it. And because there's so many moving pieces, you don't want the structure that you set for yourself to be too rigid, right? There's other folks involved. You want to make sure that you have some flexibility built into it to accommodate their schedules, their lives, and just the fact that other things happen. So what could go wrong, right? You've got all of these great plans. You've been practicing your time management. You've been practicing your action planning. You're set up. You're good to go. It's a perfect plan. Well, there's outside factors. There's lots of things that can kind of throw a wrench in it. So deadlines might change, right? Sometimes an instructor sets the deadline before Thanksgiving break and then they switch it to after, or they may move it up on you. So to kind of keep involved with that, to make sure that you're on the pulse of that, you want to be checking BB Learn in your email regularly to stay on top of these sorts of things. You might have to work in a group, right? So that's a whole different dynamic, which we'll talk about here in a second. But if you're working in a group, no matter how perfect your project is, there are other people involved with it, and having to rely on their schedules, their timelines, their work ethic can add some stress and some conflict into this project. And then keep in mind that life might happen. So stay connected with your instructors or faculty partners or industry partners if emergencies pop up, right? So let's say you needed to order a lot of supplies, but due to the pandemic, shipping is a lot slower. Letting people know that that's something that you're running into that you can't control is a good thing to keep in mind. Or let's say you suddenly need to go home to help out a family member or something. Just letting the people that you work with know that that's the case. You don't have to include a ton of detail in those situations, but just enough to let them know that you are still working on things. It's just the timeline might need to shift a little. So that is where the reminder of including some flexibility is even more important. So we can't plan for every different possible thing that might happen, but we can add some space into our schedules, into our plans to sort of create a buffer in case things go wrong. So I want to talk about how we handle group projects, because if you're like me or 90% of the students I work with, you get stressed out about them. It's really hard to work on a group project. I don't know if I've met any students that have a real enjoyment for them. I know the only group projects that I really enjoyed is when I got to be in a group with people that I knew were on top of it, who I knew I could trust to be engaged and involved with the group's work. And those didn't always happen. So a couple of quick pointers when it comes to group projects. One, meet early and meet often. So often I'll see students who just say oh yeah, we met right after class when it was assigned, and then we're gonna meet again after we've done all of our work. That's not enough. You wanna be checking in a little bit more frequently to see how everyone's doing, and so that if you run into the case where someone isn't able to complete the work that they need to, you have some time and some extra help to get it done sooner. Get a group message going. So whether that's Microsoft Teams, a Discord server, Facebook, whatever sort of communication you want to use, get something set up. This will help facilitate, obviously, conversation within the group, but it's also a great way for team members to kind of check in to see how things are going. It's easy to plan meetings and all of that jazz. You want to make sure that you're assigning the work clearly and early. And when I say clearly, I mean write it down, make sure there are no questions about who's in charge of what, and lay out expectations for how you want that work to look. So you might tell someone, hey, I want you to make the slides for, the introduction of our presentation. That's really vague. What are those slides supposed to look like? How many are there going to be? What is the format of them? How much information should be included? All of that sort of stuff needs to be figured out at the beginning. And like I said, do it early. You don't want to run into the issue where you just kind of be okay, everybody work on it and we'll come together later. You want to make sure that it's all set in stone before anyone starts working on something. And then this goes along with meeting early and often. Schedule some check-ins. So, the bare minimum is a first meeting, a middle point, and then like right before it's due. But try and put in more than that. You know, check in, maybe you've got 4 weeks to do it, check in once a week just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Intermediate deadlines can really help keep your project on track. So kind of setting expectations for what you hope to have complete by the next meeting is a good way to make sure the project gets done. And just as a reminder, if you have to give a presentation as part of this group project, schedule a time to practice. You never want to go into a group presentation where you haven't at least done one run through all together beforehand. This just helps kind of smooth out any rough patches, make sure that there's no weird, awkward silences or anything like that, and gives you all a chance to see how the information fits together in the presentation form. You might have it structured one way, do a practice one and run and realize like, oh, we should really flip around these sections for it to flow better or to make more sense. So doing those practice runs of a presentation is really critical. So what if a group member isn't helping, right? This is something that I'm sure most of you have experienced either in college or in high school. You'll have 1 or 2 group members that don't contribute a lot, or you're the only person doing the work. How do we handle that situation? Number 1, keep track of communication within the group. So having a really clear paper trail helps to show that you tried to reach out. So it's not a great time when you are trying to get a group member to engage with it and they just like say like, oh, you never contacted me. If you have a really clear system of communication, you're able to be like, no, we have contacted you. We discussed this already. Like, what's up? This is also helpful in case you need to go to an instructor about the problem. You can say, hey, like this is when we contacted, this is how many times we've contacted, and we just haven't heard from our other teammate. If there is a problem and you're able to contact the professor about it early. So if a group member hasn't responded to messages, then check in with the professor to see if they can help you contact them and to double check your contact info, right? Maybe you got the email address wrong and the professor can check that for you. Also, sometimes students are more likely to respond from a message coming from their instructor versus coming from a classmate. It's not great, but if that is something that you need to do, make sure you do it early. If you are grading each other, so some instructors have sort of like a peer grade report at the end of group projects, make sure that you include any information about the struggles in your peer grade, but be specific, not petty. So focus on what you did to reach out and the parts that were assigned but weren't completed. So what I mean by that is try not to be snide about like, oh, this person was super lazy and did nothing. Like be specific about it. Say, I tried to contact this team member X number of times. They never responded. We assigned them this part of the presentation. They didn't complete it by our due date. So Y member of the team had to finish it for them. So being really clear in that does a couple of things. 1, it shows that you really tried to engage this team member. And 2, it's much more professional. So professors are going to take that sort of report that's given to them a lot more seriously, and they're going to be a lot more understanding about the situation. And then finally, keep in mind that people are going through a lot right now. So remember to be civil and polite when you reach out. So I kind of have a 3-strike rule, right? Like if someone doesn't respond to the first 2, or, if they don't respond to the first one, but they respond to the second one, I'm not going to be mean about it because I realize that right now is an incredibly stressful time. But if I've been reaching out, like 5 times and no one's responded, then yeah, it's a little more frustrating. But be a little bit kind to folks. You don't know, there might be a big life situation that's happened. They aren't obligated to tell you those things. So just operate under the assumption that maybe they're under a lot of stress. So if you want more tips about how to handle specific situations with group members, please reach out to me. It's a little bit difficult to generalize all of these different situations because there are so many different ways that group projects can become stressful and confusing. So just let me know if you want any help with handling those. Alrighty, so I want to check out an example, and the example that we're going to use is the final project for this class. So it has been posted for quite a while now, but just as a reminder, the first draft is due on the 20th, so that's the day before we leave for fall break, and the final due date is on the 16th of December. So first we're going to tackle looking at this project, right? What goes into it? Well, you can see that you need to have at least 3 workshops planned on college success strategies. You need a title for each workshop, an explanation or justification for the topics, and you need to identify 3 objectives and 3 tasks that you're going to take to complete it. Now, the only thing you need are the actual proposals. You don't need to make the workshop itself, so that's important to remember. We already covered how many proposals are required. There's 150 word count minimum for each of the justifications, so that's important to keep in mind. Now let's talk about how we might want to break this project up. So one natural way to do it is to handle one proposal at a time, right? So you could do it that way. You could break it up into like, okay, I'm going to research which college success strategies seem the most useful first, check. Then I'm going to look at justification for each of those, check. And then I'm going to look at the objectives and the sort of way in which I want to complete this project, check. So the other thing to keep in mind with these is to consider the grading rubric. So you'll notice that there is a rough draft due. That's an important thing to include in there. And then, you know, looking at some of the other things, you'll notice that like clarity, grammar, and formatting counts for part of the grade. So you might want to include a plan to check your formatting. But this is a way that you can kind of structure going through this project for yourself. Now, keep in mind, it is due pretty soon, so you want to make sure that you're on top of it and you're getting a rough draft into me by Friday. So for your deliverable for this whole discussion today, I want you to try out project planning for either a final project, final exam, or if you don't have one of those, just a big life goal that you have. And I want you to build a large scale plan to give yourself some structure, and then build one of a smaller plan for one of the details. And then I want you to consider some of the factors that go into that. So we're going to switch over to BB Learn and look over this. So if we head over to weekly content, maybe, there we are, and go to week 5. You will see that the project management deliverable is, I want you to think of a final project, final test, or life goal. I want you to build a large scale plan to give yourself some structure, a smaller plan for the first step of that larger plan. I want you to include at least 3 steps. And then I want you to think about some challenges you may encounter and what are factors that you don't have control over. So include those in that. You can type it up as a Word doc or a PDF and submit that to me here. But with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. It is still snowing outside, so stay warm, stay dry, and stay safe this weekend. But I will talk to you all soon. Bye.